This book is a stupid, silly hodgepodge of influences, but oh my god, is it a blast. Dungeon Crawler Carl, I'm rating it 3.75 out of 5 stars. At first, I thought it was just a silly, enjoyable read, but it turned out to be much more than that. However, there are still some things that's stopping me from giving it that full 4 stars. Let's get into it. Dungeon Crawler Carl has everything you need to get over a reading slump. Imagine overlord aliens collapsing Earth into a subterranean dungeon in which the last surviving members of the human race and other species on Earth need to compete in this dungeon crawl for the entertainment of an intergalactic reality TV show. It follows Carl, a human, and his cat, Donut, as they walk through the dungeon, and there's investors, there's PR managers, there's other talk shows, there's intergalactic audiences, there's other politics and factions, and imagine Hunger Games, but way bigger and way more chaotic. So what works? This book honestly has a wild mix of influences. To me, the humor at times felt like Rick and Morty. The game mechanics of the dungeon that are typical in a lit RPG are pretty similar to other things that are in the genre or shows like Sword Art Online or Overlord. The competition aspect of fighting for survival, as well as the sponsors and the PR managers and these shows, also felt very Hunger Game coded. And the tonality of the whole book absolutely reminded me of just playing D&D with my friends, where you get into combat with the most ridiculous and crazy homebrew imaginable, and everyone is just making jokes and fighting and turning into murder hobos. Tonally, actually, it reminds me a lot of one of my favorite shows ever, Adventure Time, where it's a lot of silly goofiness that is entertaining, and then randomly you get really deep and existential into this other theme. And Dungeon Crawler Carl was a lot like that, where it was silly and fun, and then randomly you're kind of hit with this moment where you're kind of like, whoa, this is really serious, but it gets right back into that crazy dungeon chaos. But underneath all of that chaos, you can absolutely see the deeper themes that it's touching on. And honestly, it reads sort of like political satire. You can see the roots and the start of commentary on things like capitalism, sponsorship, corporations, media, and entertainment culture, and how they just feed audiences exactly what they want. And also watching things play out, it also kind of touches on the innate human nature and how people handle different things, morality. Also really touches on sexualization. This happens to Carl a lot by the AI in the dungeon. It also really starts to hint at some of these more grander sci-fi themes. Things like humans are actually seeded on Earth by these overlord alien corporations for the sole purpose of being cattle to compete and be slaughtered in these dungeons so they can make money off of it. Even slightly touching on things like religion and maybe gods aren't real at all, but they're really just these kind of really advanced alien races. And also foreshadowing at something I think will probably be developed down the line of the kind of differences in politics and maybe fascism and just economics that are kind of being hinted at in this first book. I don't think any of these themes are actually fully explored or even really fully leaned into, but you can absolutely see it building towards something bigger. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised with how this is going and kind of Carl's mantra of "you won't break me," of this story ending up being some type of the indomitable human spirit, man versus God, in quotations there, type of story. That direction isn't fully realized either, but the groundwork is absolutely there. The prose in this book isn't anything special. It's not lyrical or stylistically ambitious, but for a story like this, it works. It is built for momentum, and it absolutely just keeps you hooked in the plot going. Now, what doesn't work? My biggest issue with this book is that it doesn't let emotional moments breathe. For example, there are many times where Carl comes to the sudden realization that virtually everyone on Earth is basically dead. And while it touches on that emotion for maybe a second, honestly, very often, the next sentence is just getting bogged down and getting back to that kind of silly, sometimes funny, sometimes stupid commentary from the AI and achievements or just other notifications. Later in the book, it starts to slow down a little more and kind of lean into those emotional moments or those heavier themes, but I still think not nearly enough. A good comparison for my D&D players out there is watching a campaign ran by Brennan Lee Mulligan. His campaigns are filled with ridiculous humor and chaos, but when an emotional moment happens, he makes the table sit with it, the emotion lands, and then they move on. And while that might not be the major focus, it absolutely complements the silly and chaotic nature of the rest of it. Whereas in this book, I don't think we ever get a moment to sit with those things. That might be the point, and it might just be because it is the first book, but I think it moves on incredibly too fast. Another issue I had was the AI achievement system, as well as kind of the loot boxes and the notifications, or just the commentary in general, but mainly that kind of AI commentary and notification system. I get that it's supposed to be commentary and satire on corporate messaging and game mechanics, and that this is kind of just native to the genre. And sometimes it was funny, it was enjoyable, but even knowing that, even though it was purposeful, it still kind of recreates the worst parts about MMOs and these games and ads, is that it feels like clutter on a page, especially in this type of medium. It works when you're playing a game, as you can actively kind of go through that. In a novel, it can get very repetitive very quick. There is also a slightly grindy vibe to this book that is native to dungeon progression fantasies, and while the plot kind of keeps you going, there is still that kind of go, kill, level up, repeat loop that is in here. And it is enjoyable, and I think that a big part of it is that it is the start of the dungeon, so I think we're going to see much more crazy things happen as the series goes on, but this first book, that is definitely present. And finally, while this book does touch on a lot of these bigger themes, I definitely wish it leaned into them more. I think this first book definitely feels like setup for things to be explored down the line, but I wish there was some more leaning into those themes in this first book. Now, for a reader experience, despite all my issues with it, this book was a really fun ride. The humor doesn't always land, but when it does, it hits. The world is creative, the situations are absolutely insane, and the main characters, Carl and Donut, are much more compelling characters than I initially thought they would be. And even though the deeper themes that it touches on aren't fully explored yet, I'm definitely expecting the story to get way more into those things as the series progresses, and I'm really excited for it. Now, who's this for? If you like D&D, if you like tabletop games, especially role-playing ones, you're going to love this. This one might surprise some people, but if you like dystopian sci-fi, maybe even a little bit of political intrigue, there might be some things here that might surprise you. Dungeon Crawler Carl, that's 3.75 out of 5 stars from me. I will definitely be reading on, as I'm really excited to see where this story goes, and I'm really hoping it starts to lean way more into those bigger and grander themes.